Hello there and welcome to the Sleepy Space Channel. Somewhere out in the dark between the stars, two traveling civilizations could cross paths, and physics would grant them almost nothing. No fleet, no landing, no long, unhurried conversation. At the speeds such a crossing demands, the two would most likely meet as a single silent flash, near for a few minutes, then carried apart forever by the very motion that brought them together. What could pass between them in that instant? A burst of light, a record flung across the closing gap, or only the cold memory of a ship that could no longer answer, is the quiet, unresolved question we turn to tonight. If you find these explorations worth your time, a like or a subscribe helps the channel reach others who do. Thank you for being here. But for the next couple of hours, none of this is something you need to carry. Settle in. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow. Let the distance grow quiet, and let the day fade away behind you. Let's begin. To understand what it would mean for two peoples to meet somewhere out beyond the last light of any star, we have to begin with the place where such a meeting would happen. And the first thing to know about that place is how nearly it is made of nothing. The space between the stars is the emptiest thing most of us will ever try to imagine, and the mind is not built to hold it. We are creatures of crowded rooms and full skies. The deep is neither. Consider the air in the room around you. A single cubic centimeter of it, a little cube no larger than the tip of a finger, holds tens of billions of molecules, all of them jostling, all of them close. Now carry that same little cube far out past the planets, past the edge of the sun's influence, into the ordinary dark between one star and the next. In that same volume you would find, on average, a single atom. 1. Where the room held numbers too large to picture, the deep holds one lonely particle of hydrogen, drifting, and often not even that. In the particular pocket of the galaxy that surrounds our own sun, the count is lower still, a fraction of an atom in each cubic centimeter. This is a vacuum more complete than anything that has ever been built on Earth. The finest laboratory instruments we have, machines that can empty a chamber more thoroughly than almost any human effort before them, still leave behind far more matter than the space between the stars contains on its own. The deep is not merely empty by comparison to a room. It is empty by comparison to our best attempts at emptiness. Into this near-perfect nothing, the stars themselves are set with a spareness that is just as difficult to hold in the mind. The nearest star to the sun lies a little more than 4 light-years away. That distance is so large that light itself, the fastest thing there is, takes more than 4 years to cross it. A beam leaving that star tonight would not arrive until a child born this evening had learned to walk and speak. And that is the closest one. That is our nearest neighbor in all the dark. There is a way to shrink these numbers down to something the hand can almost feel, though even the shrinking leaves us short. Imagine the sun reduced to the size of a single grain of sand. On that scale, the next grain, the nearest other star, would lie tens of kilometers away. Between those 2 grains, there would be nothing you could see at all, nothing but the thin, cold gas and the slow drift of dust, spread so faintly across so much distance that for all practical purposes it is absence. A ship crossing from one grain to the other is not traveling through a landscape. It is traveling through a gap. This is the setting, then, for any meeting between two traveling civilizations, and the setting shapes everything that follows. For two ships to meet out here, it is not enough that both exist. It is not even enough that both exist at the same moment in the long life of the galaxy. They must exist close enough to sense one another, inside a volume of space so enormous that two objects moving for tens of thousands of years might pass their whole journeys without ever coming within a light year of each other. The galaxy is not a harbor where vessels cross wakes in a crowded channel. It is a darkness wide enough that two wakes almost never cross at all. And so the emptiness is the first and largest fact of the whole question. It is the reason a meeting between the stars would be rare, almost past reckoning, rarer than almost any event we could name. Two civilizations, each having done the enormous work of sending something into the dark, would still have to thread that something through a nothing so immense that the odds of their paths ever nearing one another are the quiet, sobering ground on which the entire subject stands. Before we ask what such a meeting would be like, we have to sit for a moment with how unlikely it is that it happens even once. Yet there is a strange gift folded inside that same emptiness, and it is worth holding on to as we go. The very nothingness that makes a meeting so improbable is also what would make it unmistakable if it ever came. Out here, there is no weather to hide behind. There is no horizon, no forest, no crowd, no background of noise and motion into which a thing could disappear. Against a backdrop of near-perfect cold and near-perfect dark, anything warm, anything moving, anything shaped by a mind would stand out with a clarity that no observer bound to a planet ever gets to enjoy. A single-made thing, adrift in the deep, would be in its own quiet way the loudest object for light years in every direction. The deep is cold as well as empty, and the cold matters as much as the emptiness. Far from any star, an object with no heat of its own settles toward a temperature only a few degrees above the absolute floor, the coldest anything can ever be. That floor is set by the faint afterglow of the young universe, a whisper of warmth left over from the beginning of everything, spread evenly across all of space. Against that even, ancient cold, the smallest warmth becomes visible. A thing that carries its own heat, from engines or from bodies or from the simple work of staying alive, glows in the dark like a coal in an unlit room. It helps to remember, too, that our own little neighborhood is quieter even than the average. The sun and its nearest companions sit inside a larger cavity, a bubble carved out of the interstellar gas long ago, where the density drops lower still, toward 1,000th of a particle in each cubic centimeter. We live, in a sense, in a clearing within the forest of the galaxy, a patch of especially thin and especially empty space. Any ship setting out from here would begin its journey in one of the emptiest stretches of an already empty sea. The distances, for all their fixity in a human lifetime, are not fixed forever. The stars drift, each on its own slow path around the center of the galaxy, and over hundreds of thousands of years, the arrangement of the sky quietly rearranges itself. The star that is nearest to us now was not always nearest, and will not always be. Across the great spans of time that an interstellar journey would occupy, even the question of which star is the closest neighbor has more than one answer. The map itself is slowly turning, too slowly for us to feel, but not too slowly to matter to a voyage measured in the same long units. And the light years that measure all these gaps are, quietly, a measure of time as much as distance. To look at the nearest star is to look 4 years into its past, because that is how long its light has been traveling to reach the eye. There is no way to see any distant thing as it is at this exact moment. The farther away a thing lies, the older the news of it. This single fact, so easy to state and so hard to feel, will return again and again as we go, because it shapes not only how such a meeting would look, but whether the two who met could ever truly speak. For now, it is enough to let the emptiness settle, and to hold in the mind that quiet, enormous, patient dark, waiting to be crossed. It is worth pausing on just how thinly the stars are scattered, because the number resists belief even when stated plainly. Our own solar system, measured out to the farthest reach of its planets, is already a structure so wide that light takes many hours to cross it. And yet the distance to the very nearest star is thousands of times wider still. If the whole solar system, from the sun to its outermost world, were a single coin held in the palm, the nearest star would be another coin lying kilometers away, with nothing but empty table between them. Stars are not neighbors in any sense a person would recognize. They are distant islands separated by oceans that dwarf the islands themselves. The thin gas of the deep is not quite the whole story, either, because scattered through it is dust, and the dust is the one part of the emptiness that a fast ship would have to respect. Each grain is far smaller than a grain of sand, so small that in ordinary terms it is nothing at all. But a ship crossing between the stars might move at a great fraction of the speed of light, and at those speeds, even the smallest grain carries an enormous sting. A traveler racing through the deep would meet the sparse dust not as a gentle mist, but as a steady, faint erosion, and would need to carry some shield against a medium that, to any slower eye, looks like pure vacuum. The emptiness is nearly total, and yet it is not quite nothing, and the difference matters most to those who cross it quickest. All of this together is what makes the deep such a strange stage for a meeting. It is enormous beyond feeling, empty beyond comparison, cold almost to the floor of what cold can be, and scattered with just enough dust to matter and just little enough to see across. A civilization that sends a ship into it sends that ship into the largest and quietest thing there is. And whatever waits out there to be met, if anything does, waits in a silence so deep that the mere fact of not being alone, even for a moment, even in passing, would be enough to change how a people understood the whole of the sky above them. That is the ground we build on. Everything that follows is an attempt to imagine a single crossing of paths in a place designed, by its very nature, to keep all paths apart, and in a silence that has held, unbroken, for almost the whole age of the stars. When we picture meeting another civilization, the word itself misleads us. Civilization calls to mind a crowd, a city, a fleet, a whole living world arranged behind whoever we happen to meet. But a meeting between the stars would almost certainly be nothing of the kind. It would be a meeting with whatever small, sealed fragment of a civilization had been cast out into the dark, and there are only a few forms that fragment could plausibly take. Before we can imagine the meeting, we have to imagine, gently and in turn, what might actually be there to be met. The most human possibility, and in some ways the most touching, is another ship like the one doing the meeting. A vessel built to cross the stars would not carry the people who launched it. The journey is too long for that. It would carry their distant descendants, generations removed, people born aboard who have lived their whole lives inside its corridors and known its steady hum as the sound of the world. To them, the origin world is not a memory but a story, handed down, half legend by now, a place their ancestors spoke of and they themselves have never seen and never will. If two such ships were to meet, something quietly remarkable would be true of both crews at once. Neither would be the crew that chose the voyage. Neither would carry the hopes that set it in motion, except as inheritance. Both would be made of people who were handed a purpose by ancestors they never knew, carrying it forward simply because it had been entrusted to them. Two ships of inheritors, then, meeting in the dark, each bearing a promise older than anyone aboard. It is a meeting not of founders but of keepers, and there is a particular tenderness in that which is worth holding on to. Far more likely than any crude ship, though, is a machine. A civilization that wished to reach across the galaxy would find it far cheaper, far simpler, and far kinder to send instruments than to send bodies. A machine needs no air and no water. It needs no harvest, no medicine, no descendants, no long unbroken chain of lives willing to be born and die in transit. It needs only power and patience, and of those a well-built machine can carry a great deal. For every crude ship that might ever cross the deep, there could be 1,000 quiet probes, and so a meeting between the stars is far more likely to be a meeting with one of them. Some such probes have been imagined as messengers, and the idea is an old and gentle one. A civilization might build a patient machine and send it not racing across the galaxy, but drifting towards some promising star, there to wait, quietly, perhaps for ages, holding a message ready. It would say nothing and do nothing until someone finally arrived to hear it. Then, and only then, it would wake and offer what it carried, a greeting left in advance by makers who understood that they themselves could never make the trip. To meet such a probe would be to meet an errand, still faithfully running, long after the ones who set it going had fallen silent. Other machines have been imagined as something more self-sufficient still, able to repair themselves and even to copy themselves. The idea runs like this. A single probe reaches a new star system, gathers raw material from whatever it finds there, and builds working copies of itself, which it then sends onward to other stars, where each does the same. From one launch, given enough time, a whole galaxy could quietly fill with patient observers, none of them the original, all of them descended from a single act of sending. If such machines exist, then the thing a ship meets in the dark might be one of these, generations of copies removed from a maker it can no longer even name. There is a quieter possibility than any of these, and in some ways a sadder and more beautiful one. A ship does not stop when its makers die. It coasts. An object launched into the deep keeps very nearly all of its speed, because there is almost nothing out there to slow it, no air to drag against, no ground to meet. And so the thing encountered might not be alive at all. It might be a hull that has been dark and cold for longer than the encountering civilization has itself existed, still holding the course it was set upon, its makers now not even a memory it is capable of keeping. Meeting it would be less like meeting a stranger, and more like finding a letter that has been traveling through the mail for 1,000,000 years, its sender long past answering. Such a derelict would carry whatever its makers had chosen to place aboard, sealed against the ages. Perhaps a record of who they were. Perhaps images of a world now unrecognizable or gone. Perhaps nothing but the bare, eloquent fact of their having existed, having built this thing, having sent it outward with some hope we can no longer read. It would be a time capsule not meant for us, opened by accident across an ocean of years, the only surviving word from a people who may have vanished before the first ancestor of the finder was born. There is grief in that, but there is also a strange grace, the grace of being remembered by a stranger simply because the stranger happened to pass. And then there is the possibility that the meeting involves nothing solid at all. The other civilization might announce itself only as light, as a beam, or a pulse, or a pattern in the radio that could not have been made by any natural thing. In the emptiness between the stars, a deliberate signal is often far easier to send, and far easier to catch than a body is to move. A ship might cross the entire boundless length of its journey and never encounter a single object, and yet still be met, if at some point along the way a patterned light reached it, that plainly was the work of a mind. To be met by a signal is to be met by a voice without a face, and it may be the most common meeting of all. A signal carries its own particular sorrow, because a signal outlives its speaker. Light, once sent, keeps traveling long after the sender has gone quiet or gone entirely. So to catch a patterned beam in the dark is not proof that anyone is still out there sending it. It may be the last word of a civilization already ended, still crossing the deep because nothing has stopped it. A message whose meaning survives, while its maker does not. In this, the signal and the derelict are cousins. Both are contact with a presence that may already be absence, a hello arriving from someone who can no longer be greeted in return. What unites all of these forms is that any of them could be far older than the civilization that meets it. Out in the deep, age is not measured against the short clock of a single lifetime, or even the longer clock of a people. It is measured against the slow, enormous clock of the galaxy itself, and against that clock a probe or a derelict or a beam might have been traveling for spans that make whole histories look brief. The thing met in the dark is very likely to be a survivor from a time before the meeting was imaginable, still keeping faith, in its own way, with a purpose set down long ago. And so the cast of what might be out there is small and strange and quietly moving. Not a crowd. Not a fleet. A single sealed fragment of somebody, or a machine still running an old errand, or a message that has outlived the hand that wrote it, drifting on through the patient dark until, against all odds, it is finally found. There is a plain logic beneath why the machines are so much likelier than the crews, and it is worth laying out gently because it shapes the whole shape of any meeting. The cheapest thing a civilization can send across the stars is information, a pattern of light that costs almost nothing to launch and can carry a great deal. The next cheapest is a machine, expensive but tireless, needing no comforts and asking nothing on the way. The most costly thing by far, ruinously and almost prohibitively costly, is a living body, which must be fed and warmed and healed and kept in company across the whole enormous span of the crossing. So the order of likelihood runs downward from signal to probe to crewed ship, and any honest picture of contact has to be weighted the same way. We long to imagine meeting people. We are far more likely to meet what people sent. The self-copying machine deepens this still further, in a way that is quietly astonishing when followed to its end. Such a probe would need to be launched only once, by anyone, anywhere, ever, for its copies to spread in time across almost the whole galaxy. One civilization on one world, building one patient self-replicating traveler, could seed the dark with quiet observers long after that civilization itself had passed. This is part of why some thoughtful people find the very silence of the sky a small puzzle. If such machines are as achievable as they seem, and if anyone has ever built one, the deep should not be empty of them. That it appears to be is one of the gentle, open questions we carry with us as we go. A crewed ship and a probe would also meet a stranger on entirely different terms, and the difference is not small. A machine can wait without cost. It can drift for ages, patient and unbothered, spending nothing but time. A crewed ship cannot. It is always racing something, its supplies, its stores, the slow arithmetic of how many lives it can carry and for how long. So a probe that encounters a crewed ship holds a kind of patience the crew can never match, and a crew that encounters a probe meets something that could, if it wished, simply outweight them all. Even the tempo of a meeting, its urgency or its ease, would depend on which of these forms had come to the dark, and which had merely been passing through. And a dark, cold, coasting derelict carries one last quality worth naming plainly, because it is the plainest of all. A hull that has lost its heat and its light is very nearly impossible to see coming, and moving at the speeds the deep allows, very nearly impossible to stop once it is close. Most such objects would pass unnoticed and unnoticing, two blind travelers crossing the same nothing without ever knowing the other was there. The meetings we can imagine are the rare ones where something is warm enough, or bright enough, or loud enough in the radio to be caught before it is gone. The rest, and they would be the measureless majority, would happen in silence, unrecorded, each traveler alone, even in the one moment it was not. A meeting in the deep would not begin with arrival. It would begin, long before, with detection, and often the detection would come so far ahead of anything else that little could be done about it for years. Out here, the first sign of another civilization would not be a shape resolving out of the dark. It would be something far subtler, a small wrongness in an otherwise familiar sky, a place where the numbers no longer quite fit the pattern the deep is supposed to hold. Against so much cold and so much dark, the first knowledge of another would arrive as the faintest of anomalies, and only slowly grow into certainty. The loudest of those anomalies would be warmth. Anything alive and anything powered is warm, and warmth cannot easily be hidden, because warmth glows. It shines in the infrared, the long invisible light that heat gives off, and deep space is only a few degrees above the absolute floor of cold. A ship carrying its own heat, from engines, from bodies, from the simple ceaseless work of staying alive, would burn in the infrared like a coal in an unlit room. It would be far brighter against that even cold than it could ever be against the glare of a nearby star. Long before any hull could be seen, its heat could be felt across the dark. Warmth is the tell that is hardest to suppress, because to stay alive at all is to be warm. Motion would be the second tell, quieter but just as sure. The stars over any human span are effectively fixed. They do not wander. They hold their places in the patterns our ancestors named and our descendants will still recognize. But an object crossing between them moves, and against that unmoving backdrop, even a slow mover eventually gives itself away. A patient watcher, comparing the sky to the sky of a year before, would find one point of light that had shifted, a single spark out of place, drifting against a background that had not. That drift is the signature of a thing that does not belong to the fixed order of the stars, a thing that is going somewhere. The third tell would be order itself, and of the three it is the most certain, the one that cannot be mistaken for anything natural. Nature makes light in broad, smeared, predictable ways. Stars shine across wide ranges of color. Clouds of gas glow in their soft, characteristic hues. But nature does not, on its own, make a tight, narrow beam, or a clean pulse that repeats on a steady count, or a signal placed just so and held with deliberate precision. A pattern that could only be made on purpose is the single sign that admits no other explanation. If the other civilization wished to be found, this is how it would announce itself. And even if it did not, the ordinary leak of its machines, the incidental spill of its own activity, might carry just enough order to betray it to a careful listener. There is a reason searches for other civilizations look for exactly this kind of order, and it is worth understanding, because it tells us what a real first sign would look like. The narrower and steadier a signal is, the harder it is for nature to counterfeit. A pure, thin tone, held at a single note, is almost a signature of intent, because the broad processes of the cosmos scatter their light across many notes at once. So a listener sweeping the dark would not be hoping for a voice or a word. They would be hoping for something far simpler and far stranger, a note too pure to be an accident, a rhythm too even to be chance. The first message might carry no meaning at all in its content, and yet say everything by the mere fact of its cleanness. A ship's own engine could complicate the picture in a curious way, because a bright drive might outshine everything else about the vessel. If a ship ran a powerful engine, The first thing seen of it might not be its hull or its heat of living, but its exhaust, a flame in the dark far brighter than the thing that carried it. A civilization might, in that case, be seen first not as a body, but as a fire, a moving point of fierce light whose true shape lay hidden behind its own glare. Only later, as the fire dimmed or the distance changed, might the vessel behind it slowly become clear. The brightest thing about a traveler is not always the traveler. The tools that would reveal a nearby ship are, quietly, the same tools that already reveal the nearest stars. The slow shift of a near thing against far things, the faint warmth of a cold and distant source, the careful watch for order in the noise, these are not exotic. They are the ordinary instruments of looking closely at the sky. What would be extraordinary is not the method but the result, the moment when the familiar tools, turned on the familiar dark, returned something that had never been there before, a warmth, a motion, an order that no star and no cloud could account for. But here the deepest strangeness of detection returns, the one we first met in the emptiness. Detection across such distances is always detection of the past. Whatever is sensed left its source years ago, and across the greater gaps many years ago. The warm point of light marks not where a ship is, but where it was. The clean signal is the voice of a moment already gone. The drifting spark has, by the time it is noticed, drifted further still, to a place the light has not yet reported. So the first knowledge of another civilization would arrive already old, a sighting not of the vessel, but of its wake, an echo of a presence that has since moved on. Everything that followed would then be a slow, patient labor of trying to close the gap between what was seen and what is now true. A watcher who caught the warmth, the motion, the order, would know only where the other had been, and would have to reason forward, carefully, to guess where it had gone. And as fresher light arrived, that guess would be corrected, again and again, each new glimpse a little less old than the last. Two ships closing on one another would each be forever reacting to the other's past, aiming not at where the other is, but at where the other was, adjusting endlessly as the truth caught up. The dark does not lie, but it is always late. And silence, it is worth saying, would be its own kind of message. A civilization that had chosen to run cold and dark, to hide its warmth and hush its signals, would be telling any watcher something by the very absence of a tell. It would be saying that it did not wish to be found, or that it had decided caution was wiser than announcement. To detect nothing where something might be is not always to be alone. Sometimes it is to be in the presence of someone who has decided, for reasons of their own, to make no sign at all. That, too, is a first sign, read not in what arrives, but in the shape of what does not. It helps to sit with just how far ahead of everything else the first warmth would come. Infrared light is precisely how the coldest, faintest, most distant warm things in the whole sky are found, the ones too dim and too cool to shine in ordinary light. A powered ship is exactly that kind of source, a small, warm thing that the great cold background makes visible almost in spite of itself. So the earliest sign of a civilization would likely be nothing dramatic, only a faint smudge of heat where the maps say there should be none, a warmth so slight that at first it might be mistaken for an error, checked, doubted, and only slowly believed. The most consequential discovery a people could make might arrive looking like a flaw in the instrument. And because every sign is a sign of the past, the whole business of drawing near would have a peculiar, dreamlike quality. Imagine two ships slowly closing across the deep, each watching the other. Each sees only where the other was, some years ago, and each must aim its attention, and perhaps its course, at a guess about where the other has since gone. As the gap narrows, the light grows fresher, The lag grows shorter, and the guesses grow better, but they never become certain until the very end. It is a pursuit conducted entirely through echoes, each traveler chasing a ghost of the other that is always a little ahead of the truth, until at last, in the final closeness, the ghost and the ship become one and the same. There is also the plain matter of how much warning this gives, and warning is a gift. Because nothing about the other, no light, no signal, no heat, can arrive faster than light itself. No meeting could ever truly ambush anyone. The first faint warmth would come years before the encounter, the first clean signal years before any reply could be framed. A civilization would have time, a great deal of it, to notice, to consider, to decide who it wished to be when the moment finally came. Whatever else the deep withholds, it grants this. It never lets the other arrive before the news of the other. It is slow, and its slowness is a kind of mercy, giving every watcher the long, quiet interval between the first sign and the thing itself. So the first sign, in the end, is almost never the meeting. It is the announcement of the meeting, delivered years early, written in warmth and motion and order across a patient dark. It is the moment a people learns for certain that the sky is not empty after all, that somewhere out in the cold there is a warmth that should not be there, a motion that belongs to no star, an order that only a mind could make. And between that moment and the meeting itself would lie a long, strange interval of knowing without yet having met, of not being alone and not yet being together, a quiet gap in which a civilization would have nothing to do but watch the slow light arrive, and wonder, and prepare. To see another civilization is one thing. To meet it, to come close enough to exchange more than light, is a far harder thing, and the reason is speed. Two travelers crossing the deep are not drifting gently past one another like boats on a still pond. They are moving fast, at the very least tens of kilometers in every second, and a ship built to cross the stars within a reasonable span of generations might move at a great fraction of the speed of light itself. When two such travelers approach, their speeds do not cancel. They add. And that closing speed, the sum of two enormous motions, is the quiet tyrant that governs whether a meeting is even possible at all. It is worth grounding this in something real, because the numbers are easy to wave away and hard to feel. The first visitor from beyond our own solar system that we ever caught sight of, a small dark object that passed through and left, was moving relative to us at more than 26 kilometers in every second before the sun's gravity had even taken hold of it. That was no ship. That was a bare rock, tumbling along whatever path chance had given it over the ages. And already it was moving at a speed that would carry it from one side of a country to the other, between two breaths. A crude ship, deliberately built to cross the deep in a span its passengers could endure, would move faster still, perhaps far faster. Now let two such travelers approach one another and consider what the closing speed does to the meeting. If they move toward each other, their speeds add into a single enormous rate of approach, and the entire encounter collapses into a matter of hours or minutes, or even less. There would be a long, slow age of watching the other draw near, and then, at the end, a single silent flash of passing, over almost before it began. No chance to slow. No chance to turn. No chance to linger or to circle back. The two would rush together out of the dark, cross in an instant, and rush apart again, the nearness they had waited ages for lasting no longer than a held breath. To do anything other than flash past, at least one of the two would have to change its speed to match the others, and here we meet the hard wall in its full height. Changing speed in space is enormously, almost cruelly costly. There is nothing to push against and nothing to brake against, no road, no water, no air. Every alteration of pace must be bought by throwing mass away, by hurling propellant out behind to shove the ship forward, or out ahead to slow it down. And the faster the ship already moves, the more ruinous that price becomes. A vessel that spent centuries patiently building up its speed cannot simply shed that speed on a whim to visit a stranger it happens to pass. There is a deeper trap inside this, and it compounds the cost in a way that feels almost unfair. To carry the propellant needed to slow down, a ship must carry that propellant the whole way, and carrying it means the ship is heavier, and being heavier means it needs still more propellant to move and to stop, which is itself more weight to carry, which demands more still. The cost does not grow in step with the speed. It grows far faster, folding back on itself, so that matching velocities with another interstellar traveler might cost as much energy as the entire journey up to that point. The arithmetic of stopping is merciless, and for most encounters it delivers a plain and sobering verdict. That verdict is this. In the ordinary case, the two civilizations could not stop for each other even if both of them longed to. It is not a matter of will. It is not a failure of desire or of courage. It is simply that the universe has priced the maneuver beyond what either could pay. They would see one another, know one another for a while across the shrinking gap, and then be carried apart by the very speeds that had let them cross the deep in the first place. The same motion that made the journey possible would make the meeting brief. They could only pass. And so most imaginable meetings between the stars are not meetings in the way we picture them. They are flybys, brief and geometric, shaped entirely by physics, over almost as soon as they begin. Whatever the two wished to give each other would have to be given in that narrow window, and given at the speed of light, because light is the only thing fast enough to bridge the closing gap in time. Each would fling toward the other a burst of everything it wished to share in the few moments of nearest approach, and each would catch the other's burst already receding into the dark behind. A meeting between the stars, in the usual case, would be less a handshake than two travelers calling out to one another as they pass in opposite directions, each already gone before the other's words arrive. The direction of travel would matter more than almost anything else, and it is the one thing chance would decide. Two ships crossing head-on would meet with the full sum of their speeds and the briefest possible window, a single instant of passage and no more. But two ships moving in roughly the same direction, at roughly the same pace, would have only a small difference in speed between them, and so might stay within reach of one another for a long while, drifting slowly nearer or slowly apart over years rather than seconds. The whole character of a meeting, whether it is a flash or a companionship, would hang on the accident of which way each happened to be going through the dark. It is a strange and quiet grief when you follow it through. The deep is so empty that a meeting is rare, almost past reckoning. And then, in the one rare case where two paths do cross, the very speeds that brought the travelers together are what tear them apart, allowing them only minutes or an instant of the nearness they waited ages to find. Two civilizations, each alone for the whole long history of itself, finally within sight of another, and physics granting them only a single crossing before the dark reclaims the distance between them. It is not cruelty. There is no cruelty in it. It is only the shape of things, the plain geometry of speed and space, indifferent and enormous, allowing what it allows and forbidding the rest. And yet even a flyby is not nothing, and it is worth holding that thought against the sorrow. A great deal can be learned in a short pass, and a great deal can be sent. The window is narrow, but light is quick, and a well-prepared traveler could pour an ocean of meaning through that narrow window in the moments it stayed open. What the flyby forecloses is only the things that need time, the docking, the boarding, the slow, unhurried conversation. What it still permits is the flash of recognition, the exchange of records, the mutual knowing, however brief, that one is not alone. The pass is short, but the fact of it would last as long as either civilization did. There is a bittersweet trade hidden in all of this, and it deserves to be named plainly because it governs the whole texture of contact. The faster a civilization can travel, the more of the galaxy it can reach, the more stars fall within its grasp, the wider its whole existence can become. But the faster it travels, the poorer its odds of ever stopping for anyone it meets. Speed buys range, and in the same stroke it forbids meeting. A slow people might cross paths with another and have the leisure to linger, but would reach almost nothing in a lifetime. A fast people could reach the stars and would be condemned to pass every other traveler in a flash. The two goods pull against each other, and no ship can have both at once. This same hard arithmetic falls even on the patient machines, which we might have hoped were exempt. A probe can wait forever, and waiting is cheap for it, but waiting is not the same as chasing. If a fast crewed ship has already passed, a probe cannot simply spend a little patience to catch it, because catching a thing that is already ahead and moving quickly demands the same ruinous outlay of energy that stopping does. Patience solves the problem of waiting for someone to arrive. It does nothing at all for the problem of pursuing someone who is already leaving. Even the tireless observer, then, is bound by the wall of speed, able to greet what comes to it, but unable to run down what flees. It is worth remembering, too, just how astonishing the energy to cross the stars at all really is. Merely to reach a speed that would carry a ship between the stars within the span of some generations takes an outlay so huge that it strains the imagination, an amount of energy set against a single vessel that dwarfs almost anything a world is used to spending. This is part of why the deep may hold so few fast travelers in the first place. To launch even one is a labor at the very edge of what a civilization can afford. And to ask that same civilization to pay a second such fortune, merely to slow down and greet a stranger met by chance along the way, is very likely to ask more than anyone could give. The journey itself nearly exhausts the possible. The detour to say hello lies mostly beyond it. So the wall of speed, gathered together, tells us something quiet and important about the whole question we are asking. It tells us that a meeting between the stars would almost never be a stopping, a staying, a settling into one another's company. It would be a crossing. Two motions, briefly intersecting in a place that had never held either before and would never hold either again. The travelers would arrive out of ages of solitude, know one another for a window measured in moments, and depart back into ages of solitude, carried apart by the same speeds that had carried them together. The wall does not forbid the meeting. It only shapes it, narrows it, presses it down into a single passing instant. And within that instant, everything that could be given would have to be given, and everything received, before the dark, patient and indifferent, opened the distance between them once again and let them go. Suppose the wall of speed is somehow softened. Suppose two travelers, by the accident of moving the same way through the dark, find themselves close enough and matched enough in pace to hold near one another for a while. Even then, another wall rises between them, and it is the slowest and most patient of them all. It is the wall of time, built out of the plain fact that nothing carrying a message can move faster than light, and that across the distances of the deep, light is achingly, almost unbearably slow. We are so used to speech as an instant thing that the delay is hard to feel. A word spoken in a room arrives the moment it is said. But a word sent across the space between the stars takes years to cross, and the reply takes years to return. When two travelers are still light years apart, a single exchange, One question and its answer could span longer than a human life. The one who asks might be old before the answer comes, or gone. The conversation would not happen within a lifetime. It would happen across several. This reshapes what the very word conversation can mean. On a world, speech is a quick and living thing, meaning built turn by turn, each speaker adjusting to the last, reading the other's face, catching a misunderstanding before it hardens. Across the deep, none of that is possible. There is no interrupting, because the interruption would arrive years too late. There is no clarifying in the moment, no reading of expression, no gentle correction of a word that landed wrong. Each side can only compose a long, complete, self-contained message, send it into the dark, and then wait, sometimes for years, to learn whether any of it was understood at all. The exchange becomes, in the end, less like talking and more like two people writing letters that cross somewhere in the middle of the dark. Each writes in ignorance of what the other has just written. Each answers questions the other may have already moved past. By the time a reply arrives, the one who receives it has been living for years with the message that prompted it, has thought further, changed, perhaps come to see the whole matter differently. The letters would always be a little out of step, each a report from a self that no longer quite exists by the time it is read. Contact across the deep is correspondence with the past, always, on both sides at once. And the delay works its cruelty most sharply, exactly where we would most wish it gentle. In the brief window of a flyby, when the two travelers are nearest and the delay between them is at its very shortest, there is still not enough time for a true exchange. The ships are already parting before a reply could return. So the richest moment for talking, the moment of closest approach, when the gap is smallest and the light quickest, is also a moment far too short to hold a real dialogue. The nearer they come, the less time remains. The delay shrinks, but the window shrinks faster, and the two never quite align. This is why everything meaningful would have to be front-loaded, sent early and in bulk, in hope, without waiting for the answer that could not come in time. A traveler who wished to be understood could not afford to ask a question and wait. There would be no waiting. Instead, it would have to send everything at once, a whole self poured out into the dark, anticipating what the other might most want to know and answering it in advance, guessing at the questions of a stranger it had never met. The message would be a kind of gift given blind, shaped by imagining the needs of someone entirely unknown, offered without any assurance that it would land where it was aimed. Time also works upon the travelers themselves, not only upon their words. A message sent across years is received by a different generation than the one that sent it. Aboard a crewed ship, the person who composes the greeting may be long dead before the reply arrives, and the reply may be read by a grandchild who never knew them, who inherits the exchange the way one inherits an old family letter, its writer only a name. Contact between the stars is therefore never quite between two peoples. It is between two moving rivers of generations, each handing the encounter down the line, so that the meeting belongs to no single lifetime, but is shared, in pieces, across many. There is something quietly moving in that handing down, and it changes the character of the whole endeavor. Whoever aboard is entrusted with the reply becomes a kind of keeper of a promise made before their birth. They carry forward a conversation they did not begin and will not finish, adding their piece and passing it on, trusting that someone not yet born will add the next. The exchange outlives everyone who touches it. It becomes less an act and more a tradition, a slow relay run across generations, each runner carrying the light a little further before handing it to the next and stepping, in time, aside. And yet the delay, for all its weight, carries a gift folded inside it, the same gift the emptiness gave and the speed gave. Because nothing about the other can arrive faster than the news of the other, no message could ever spring a surprise. A civilization that feared contact would have years of warning and years to decide. The delay that makes conversation so hard also makes ambush impossible. It grants every party the long, slow interval to consider, to prepare, to choose its response with care rather than in haste. What it takes in intimacy, it returns in time to be wise. The deep is slow, and its slowness, here as everywhere, is a mercy as much as a barrier. It is worth being clear that this delay is not a limitation of any tool, and cannot be engineered away. It is a property of the universe itself, woven into the same law that keeps us from ever seeing any distant thing as it truly is now. No better transmitter, no cleverer machine, no future refinement could shorten it, because it is not a flaw in the message, but a feature of space and light. The same rule that makes the nearest star 4 years old to our eyes makes every word between two travelers arrive years after its speaking. To accept contact across the deep is to accept this delay as one accepts gravity, not as an obstacle to be overcome, but as a condition to be lived within. Because replies take so long, the most useful message a traveler could send is one that tries to answer questions before they are asked. A civilization composing its greeting would have to sit and imagine what a stranger would most want to know, and then simply tell it, unprompted, at length, covering as much ground as it could in a single sending. Who are we? Where did we come from? How many are we? What have we learned? What do we wish you to understand? All of it poured out at once, in anticipation, because there would be no chance to fill the gaps later through the ordinary back and forth of talk. The message would have to be, in a sense, a whole encyclopedia of a people, offered blind, in the hope that somewhere within it lay the answer to whatever the other most wished to ask. A moving ship complicates even the delay itself, in a way that is quietly dizzying to follow. As a traveler closes the distance, the lag between question and answer shrinks, and as it opens the distance again, the lag grows. So the cost of a conversation is not fixed. It shifts continuously through an encounter, cheapest at closest approach and dearer with every kilometer after. Two travelers drawing together would find their exchange quickening, the replies arriving sooner and sooner, a growing ease, right up until the moment of nearest passing, after which the replies would begin to lag again, longer and longer, the ease slowly draining away as the dark reopened between them. The whole shape of the conversation would rise and fall with the distance, like a tide. And there is a particular sorrow reserved for the one-way meeting, the flyby that allows a message out but no answer back. A traveler might learn of another only from a sending it can never return, catch a hello it has no way to answer, receive the whole warm greeting of a stranger and be carried away before it could so much as say that the greeting had arrived. To be greeted and unable to reply is its own kind of loneliness, gentler than never being greeted at all, but shaded with a quiet ache. Somewhere out in the dark, a civilization would have said hello, and would never know whether anyone heard. Even so, the ache is not the whole of it, for a hello that goes unanswered still arrives, still lands, still tells the one who catches it that the sky was never as empty as it seemed. The reply may be impossible, but the news is real, and the news alone is enough to change a people forever. Before we go on, it is worth pausing to gather what we have gone through, because we are at the middle of the journey now, and the walls we have crossed are best held together. First, there was the emptiness, so immense that a meeting is rare, almost past reckoning. Then there was the question of who might be met, far more likely a probe, or a derelict, or a signal than any living crowd. Then there was detection, always a sighting of the past, arriving years before the thing itself. Then there was the wall of speed, which turns nearly every meeting into a single passing flash. And now the wall of time, which stretches every word across years and hands each exchange down through generations. 4 walls, then, so far: emptiness and speed and time, and still ahead of us, the walls of language and of the body. Hold them loosely as we go, and let them settle. Each one narrows the meeting a little further, and yet, strangely, each one also makes the meeting, if it ever came, more precious for all that it had to overcome. Suppose the gap is somehow held, the delay endured, and a message at last arrives whole and undamaged across the dark. A new wall rises the instant it does, and it may be the strangest of them all. Neither traveler would share a single word with the other. Not a sound, not a sign, not a gesture, not a root of any language in common. Every tongue that any people has ever spoken grew out of shared bodies, a shared world, a shared history stretching back to a common beginning. A civilization from another star would share none of that. There would be no dictionary, no key, no assumption that could safely be made. The first message would arrive as pure pattern, meaningful surely, and yet locked, with no way in. The one hope for a key lies in the very thing both travelers would have had to discover independently in order to be out there at all. To build a starship, a people must learn the regularities of the physical world, and those regularities are the same for everyone, everywhere. Counting does not depend on culture. The simplest numbers run in the same order for any mind that has ever counted anything. The ratios that govern circles and waves are fixed by the shape of space itself. The particular set of elements that make up all matter is the same across the whole universe. The steady rhythm of a single atom of hydrogen ticks at the same rate for any watcher who has learned to listen. These are the shared ground, the one language 2 strangers are guaranteed to hold in common, because it was never invented by either. It was only found. So a first message would very likely be built not from words but from demonstrations, from the plain showing of things that need no translation. Here is one. Here is one, and another, which together make 2. Here is the pattern that follows, and the next, and the next. From the simple bones of arithmetic, laid out patiently and unmistakably, a bridge might slowly be built toward shared meaning. A stranger receiving such a message would not need to know the sender's tongue. They would only need to recognize counting, which any counting mind must, and from that first recognition, brick by careful brick, an understanding could begin to rise. The message would teach its own reading, starting from the one thing no mind that could receive it could fail to know. There are particular tools that make such a bridge sturdier, and they are worth naming gently. Prime numbers are a favored opening because they almost never arise from any simple natural process, and so a string of them reads at once as deliberate, a knock that could only be a knock. Images can be sent as long strings of on and off, arranged into a grid whose size is the product of 2 primes, hinting at how the string should be folded into a picture, a way of showing rather than telling. And the rhythm of hydrogen, that universal tick, can serve as a shared ruler and a shared clock, a unit of length and of time that any radio-capable people would recognize, so that the sender can say how large a thing is, or how long, in terms the receiver already holds. These are not words. They are the scaffolding on which meaning might one day be hung. But such a bridge reaches only so far, and it is important to be honest about where it ends. Mathematics can carry facts and quantities with perfect fidelity. It can say how many, how far, how large, how long. It struggles, and perhaps fails entirely, to carry intention, feeling, or the soft, particular texture of what a civilization actually is. A stranger could learn from us exactly how many we are, and precisely how far we have traveled, and still have no way to know what we love, what we fear, what we grieve, what we meant by sending anything into the dark at all. The hardest things to translate are not the technical things. Those cross easily. It is the human things that resist, and there may simply be no arithmetic that carries them across. This is a quiet and important limit, and it deserves to be sat with, rather than solved. Knowing what a civilization does is not the same as knowing what it wants. A stranger might receive a flawless account of everything we had ever built and done, and still hold nothing of our meaning, only a list of events without the ache or the pride that made them matter to us. The facts would cross the dark intact. The weight of them would stay behind. And so two civilizations might come to know a great deal about one another and still, in the deepest sense, remain strangers, each holding an accurate and lifeless map of a country it can never truly feel underfoot. There is a danger sharper than mere failure to understand, and it is the danger of false understanding, which is worse than none. Two travelers might exchange their patterns, and each might come away convinced it had grasped the other, and each might be entirely wrong. A symbol meant as a greeting might read as a threat. A gift might read as a demand. An offer of peace might, through some mismatch neither could see, arrive looking like its opposite. And across a gap of years, a misreading cannot be quickly mended. By the time the error is even suspected, the conversation has moved on, or the travelers have parted, and the wrong belief has had years to harden into certainty. To misunderstand slowly, across the dark, is far more dangerous than not to understand at all. Because of this, a careful first message would not strive to be clever. It would strive to be almost impossible to misread. It would be simple and repetitive and patient, saying the same gentle thing many different ways at once, so that if one form were misunderstood, another might still land true. Redundancy would be its armor. Where a single elegant statement might be mistaken, a dozen plain restatements, each approaching the same meaning from a slightly different side, would give the stranger many chances to find the key and many checks against reading it wrong. Clarity, not brilliance, is what survives a crossing of years. The wisest message would be the one that trusted least to being understood the first time, and built in the most room to be understood eventually. There is a humility in all of this that is worth carrying forward because it shapes what contact could ever really be. Two civilizations reaching across the dark would not be exchanging their souls. They would be exchanging what can be shown, what can be counted, what can be demonstrated from the shared bones of number and law, and then straining, patiently and imperfectly, toward everything else. Some of it would cross. Much of it would not. And the knowledge of that limit, held honestly, might itself be a kind of wisdom, a way of meeting a stranger without pretending to more closeness than the universe allows. To speak across the stars would be to accept, from the very first word, that understanding would be partial, hard-won, and always shadowed by the risk of getting it wrong. And to try anyway, gently and with care, would be its own quiet act of hope. It is worth walking slowly through how such a message might actually build itself up from nothing, because the climb from counting to meaning is a gentle marvel. It would begin at the very bottom, with the bare idea of number, one signal, then two, then three, teaching the stranger that the sender counts and that counting is the shared floor. From there it might move to simple arithmetic, showing that 1 and 1 make 2, that patterns hold, that the sender reasons as the receiver reasons. Then, Having established that both minds share the same logic, it could climb to the elements, naming the building blocks of matter by their places in the universal order, and from the elements to the particular molecules that the sender is made of, and from those molecules, at last, toward a portrait of the sender itself. Each step would rest on the step below, and none could be skipped. The whole message would be a ladder, built rung by rung out of things no mind could deny. And yet even a self-portrait, arrived at so carefully, would still need interpreting, and that is the humbling part. A picture of a body, sent as a grid of light and dark, tells the receiver the shape of a thing, but not what it is like to be that thing. It shows a form without a life inside it. The stranger would see the outline and still not know whether they were looking at the whole creature or a part, the sender or something the sender merely valued, a portrait or a warning. Even the clearest image carries an ambiguity that no amount of arithmetic can fully close, because seeing the shape of a thing is not the same as knowing its meaning, and meaning is exactly what does not travel. Beneath all of this lies a still deeper assumption, one so basic it is easy to miss. To send a message at all is to assume that the other party shares the very notion of a message, the idea that patterns can carry meaning, that a sender means to be understood, that reaching across a gap is a thing minds do. We take this for granted because every mind we have ever met is like ours in this one respect. But a mind shaped by a wholly different world might pass the universe in ways we cannot picture, might not divide it into senders and messages and meanings at all. The bridge of mathematics assumes a fellow bridge builder on the far side. Most likely there would be one, since building anything that crosses the stars seems to demand that kind of mind. But it is an assumption, quietly load-bearing, and worth naming as we lean our whole hope upon it. For all these limits, though, there is something steadying in the picture, and it is where this wall, like the others, comes to rest. The universe, for all that it separates its peoples by emptiness and speed and time, gives them one thing held perfectly in common: the same numbers, the same laws, the same shared bones of how things are. It is not much. It cannot carry love, or grief, or home. But it is enough to build a first bridge, enough to say, here we are, here is what we are made of, here is that we thought of you. And perhaps that is the most that meeting across the stars could ever mean, not a merging of two souls, but two careful hands reaching across a dark they cannot close, meeting for a moment on the one narrow ground the universe holds out to both, and finding, even there, that it was worth the reaching. Suppose, against the odds, a meeting became physical. Suppose two travelers found a way to hold together, to match speeds and endure the delay, and build a bridge of understanding, and now wish to close the last small distance and come truly face to face. A final wall would stand between them, and it is the most intimate of all. It is the wall of the body. Life on any world is shaped by that world, down to its deepest chemistry. Its air, its gravity, its warmth, its light, the very molecules it is built from, are all answers to one particular set of conditions. A civilization from another star would be a different answer to a different set of conditions, and there is no reason at all its form would match ours in any way that made simple nearness safe or even survivable. The differences would begin with the plainest things imaginable, the things we never think about because we have never had to. The air that one people breathes could be a poison to the other. The gases that fill one ship with the ordinary smell of home might sear the lungs of any visitor, or simply fail to sustain them. A warmth that feels like a mild afternoon to one could be a killing freeze, or a killing heat to the other. A gravity that feels like solid ground beneath one people's feet could crush the other to the floor, or leave them drifting and helpless. Two crews could stand a single meter apart, separated only by a clear wall, and share nothing across it that both could survive. No common air. No common weight. No common warmth. Each would be a visitor to a world the other's body would refuse. Beneath the plain physical differences lies a subtler matter, and it must be handled gently, without any of the dread that stories usually bring to it. Every living world teems with small organisms, uncountable multitudes of them, and each is tuned across ages to its own particular hosts and its own particular world. To bring two separately evolved biologies into contact is a step no careful people would take lightly, not out of fear of monsters, but out of simple prudence, because the smallest passengers, not the largest, are the ones that history teaches caution about. It is worth saying clearly that the likeliest outcome is not catastrophe. It is indifference. Two biologies grown from wholly different origins would very probably be unable to touch each other at all, each unreadable to the other, each machinery meaningless to the other's defenses. That mutual unreadability may be the quiet truth at the center of the whole question of contact between bodies. Life reflects its origin so thoroughly that even the handedness of its building blocks, the particular orientation in which its molecules are twisted, could differ between two worlds. And if that deepest layer does not match, then the two biologies could not use one another even if they tried. One could not feed on the other, could not infect the other, could not so much as be digested by the other, because the very shapes would not fit. Where we might fear a clash, we would far more likely find a profound and total incompatibility, a life so foreign that to our own it is not even edible, not even dangerous, simply and completely other. There is a strange safety in that foreignness, a barrier that protects precisely by being absolute. Still, the uncertainty alone would counsel great and gentle caution, a meeting held deliberately at arm's length, at least at first. Even a small chance of harm, weighed against the whole future of a people, is a chance no wise traveler would rush to take. And so the first physical nearness, if it ever came, would almost certainly be a nearness through glass and vacuum, each people sealed in its own conditions, looking across at the other through whatever clear barrier could be raised, touching nothing, sharing no air, keeping the hard-won emptiness of the deep as a final protective layer between two forms of life that were never made to share a room. This may, in truth, be the deepest reason that a meeting between the stars, if it ever happened, would remain a meeting of minds and messages rather than of hands. It might simply be safer and kinder never to touch. Two civilizations could come to know one another, to honor one another, even to care for one another across the gap, and still choose, wisely and without sorrow, to keep the clear wall of vacuum between them. Not out of fear, not out of any failure of warmth, but out of the plain and loving recognition that their bodies were never built to share a space, and that the greatest tenderness they could offer each other might be the tenderness of distance, the deliberate keeping apart that lets both of them go on living. The closeness they could reach then would be a closeness of understanding rather than of contact, and it is worth insisting that this is not a lesser thing. To know another fully across a gap that must remain, to hold them in mind and in regard while keeping the space that keeps them safe, is its own kind of intimacy, perhaps a purer one than touch. The two would meet as two lit windows across a dark courtyard meet, each seeing the other's warmth, each knowing the other is there, neither able to cross and neither needing to. The vacuum between them would not be a failure of the meeting. It would be part of the meeting, the respectful distance without which the meeting could not safely happen at all. There is one clean way around this wall, and it points to something we have already seen. A meeting of machines sidesteps the problem of bodies entirely. A built ambassador carries no biology, needs no shared air or warmth or gravity, poses no risk of contamination in either direction, and can be handled, examined, even taken aboard without any of the peril that two living forms would bring to one another. This is one more reason, quietly, why the safest envoys either civilization could send might be made rather than born. Patient machines meeting patient machines in the dark, carrying between them the greetings of two peoples who could never, themselves, stand safely in the same room. The bodies stay home, sealed in the worlds that made them. Only their messengers and their messages cross. So the wall of the body, gathered up, tells us something tender about the shape contact would take. It would be a meeting across a distance that could never fully close, held gently open on purpose, out of care as much as caution. Two forms of life, each a world unto itself, each unable to enter the other without harm, reaching toward one another with everything except their hands. And perhaps in the end, that is the most fitting closeness the universe allows between its scattered children, to be known and to be kept safe, and to keep the other safe in turn, across a small, deliberate space that love itself would choose not to cross. It helps to count the walls within this wall, because there is not one barrier of the body but several, and each stands independently of the others. There is the barrier of atmosphere, the particular mix of gases a body has learned to breathe. There is the barrier of pressure, the weight of that atmosphere pressing in, which a body is built to withstand at one exact value and no other. There is the barrier of temperature, the narrow band of warmth in which a given life can function at all. And there is the barrier of gravity, the pull a body has grown its bones and its blood to meet. Matching even one of these between two separately made peoples would be a long shot. Matching all four at once, so that two crews could actually share a single space in comfort and safety, would be a coincidence so unlikely that it hardly bears hoping for. The walls do not add. They multiply, and their product is a door that almost never opens. The caution this demands is not a new idea, only an old one carried to its furthest reach. Already, in our own small ventures into space, the practice of keeping worlds from contaminating one another is taken seriously, machines cleaned and sealed so that the life of one place is not carried carelessly to another. That care is exercised now toward worlds we only suspect might once have held the simplest life. Multiply it 1,000-fold, and you begin to approach the care that two living civilizations would owe one another. The keeping of distance would not be coldness. It would be courtesy of the deepest kind, each people guarding the other's world as carefully as its own, unwilling to be the careless hand that carried something unwelcome across a gap that had kept the two safely apart since life began on either side. There is even a gentleness to be found in simply telling the other what one's body needs, and it is a gift worth naming. Part of any honest first exchange would be each people explaining, plainly, the conditions of its own life. This is the air we breathe. This is the warmth we require. This is the weight that feels like home. To say such things is to make oneself known in the most vulnerable and practical way, to hand a stranger the very terms of one's survival. And to receive them is to be trusted with something tender. Two civilizations trading the recipes of their own comfort would be trading a kind of intimacy, an admission of need, a quiet saying of, "Here is what it takes to keep me alive," offered across the dark to someone who could never provide it and would never need to. And so the wall of the body closes the same way the others have, on a note that is more peace than grief. The distance that keeps two peoples from touching is also the distance that keeps them safe, and understood rightly, it is not a wound, but a kindness. The universe made its children too different to share a room, and in the same stroke gave them a way to be near without harm, to be known without risk, to reach for one another across a small, clear space that neither needs to cross. To meet another civilization would be to learn, gently and for good, that closeness is not only touch, that two lives can matter enormously to each other and still, wisely and lovingly, keep the dark between them. It is a lesson our own scattered species half knows already. Out there, among the stars, it would simply be written larger, in vacuum and in care. Behind every wall we have crossed lies a question that no instrument can answer and no arithmetic can settle. What does the other one want? Two civilizations meeting in the dark would each face a stranger about whom they knew almost nothing that mattered, and each would have to decide how to behave long before understanding was possible. This is not a question of physics. It is a question of caution and of character, and people have argued over it thoughtfully long before any ship was ever built to make the question real. One line of thinking counsels silence and stillness and the careful hiding of oneself. If you cannot know a stranger's intentions, the argument runs, and if the cost of guessing wrong is everything you have, then the safest course is to reveal nothing and to assume the stranger reasons exactly the same way. By this view, the quiet of the galaxy is not loneliness but discipline. Everyone is listening and no one is speaking. Every people hides its warmth and hushes its signals, unwilling to be the first to call out into a dark it cannot read, each reasoning that the others are doing likewise, each holding its breath in a silence built entirely of mutual, careful fear. A meeting under this logic would be tense and guarded, each side calculating, each reluctant to show its hand, each watching for the smallest sign of what the other truly meant. There is a real force to this caution, and it is worth stating fairly before answering it. First contact, seen this way, is a single gamble with no chance to recover from a wrong move. There is no second try, no slow repair of a fatal misjudgment. And so the cautious mind prefers listening to speaking, watching to announcing, the quiet safety of never being noticed to the bright risk of being known. Whether or not one shares the fear, one can see its logic, the plain arithmetic of a stake too total to risk on the goodwill of a stranger who cannot be read. The opposing line holds that this fear, however understandable, is overdrawn. To reach the stars at all demands patience and cooperation, and the long, hard restraint required for a people to survive its own growing power. A civilization that has done that has lived long enough and worked together well enough to cross the deep, might be far more likely to be careful and curious than grasping or cruel. By this view, the very fact that the other exists, that it built something and sent it into the dark and did not destroy itself before it could, is itself evidence of the kind of patience that makes peace possible. A meeting under this logic would be wary but hopeful, two survivors recognizing in one another the same hard-won steadiness that carried them both so far. This more hopeful view rests on a quiet observation about the nature of the power involved. The very technology that could let one civilization threaten another across the stars is the same technology that requires enormous restraint to develop without self-destruction. A people reckless enough to be purely predatory might well be reckless enough to have ended itself long before reaching the deep. So the ones who make it, the argument goes, are selected for patience, filtered by their own long survival toward caution rather than aggression. If anyone is out there at all, it may be precisely because they learned, somewhere in their history, how not to be the worst version of themselves. The deep might hold not monsters but elders, made gentle by the very trials that let them last. There is no way to know in advance which of these views is right, and that uncertainty is not a flaw in the question, but its very heart. Each civilization would have to choose, without proof and without guarantee, how much to trust. And the choice would reveal as much about the one choosing as about the stranger being weighed. A fearful people would read fear in the dark. A hopeful people would read the possibility of a friend. The stranger, silent and unknowable, would become a kind of mirror, and in deciding how to treat an unknown other, each civilization would be forced to decide, plainly and finally, what kind of civilization it had itself become. The debate is not merely imagined either. Even now, among ourselves, there is a real and unresolved argument about whether we should deliberately announce our presence to the dark at all, whether to send messages outward or only to listen. Serious voices urge a wide and careful discussion before any such message is sent, holding that a decision made on behalf of a whole world should not be made lightly or alone. Other voices answer that the fear is a shadow cast by our own worst stories, and that a mature people should be able to weigh the real risks calmly, rather than flinch from imagined conquests. We have not settled it. And the fact that we have not, that we ourselves stand uncertain at the very first step, tells us something honest about how hard the question truly is. The tools of cold reasoning shed a little light here, though not comfort. It can be shown that two entirely peaceful parties, each merely afraid that the other might not be peaceful, can trap themselves into silence and suspicion, each hiding not because it is hostile, but because it cannot be sure the other is not. The fear feeds itself. Each one's silence becomes, to the other, a possible sign of menace, and so each grows quieter and more guarded still. It is a sad and delicate trap, and the sadness of it is that it can catch even those who wish each other nothing but well, binding two would-be friends into a mutual wariness that neither of them chose and neither of them wants. And yet the deep itself offers a quiet way out of the trap, the same gift it has offered all along. Because nothing can cross faster than the light that announces it, neither side can ever truly surprise the other. Every approach comes with years of warning. Every message comes with years to consider a reply. There is no ambush possible across the stars, no sudden fall, only the slow arrival of the known. And that slowness leaves room, precious room, for trust to be built carefully, rather than gambled all at once. Fear thrives on suddenness, and the deep permits none. Perhaps that is why, of all the places two peoples might meet, the dark between the stars, for all its barriers, might be the safest, the one arena, enormous and slow enough that no one need be afraid of being caught unaware. There is a last thought to carry out of this, and it turns the whole question gently around. Any gift a civilization chose to send a stranger would carry, whether it meant to or not, a message about the giver. In deciding what to offer someone it would never meet again, a people would be deciding how it wished to be remembered, by a witness it could not impress and had no reason to deceive. And so the choice of what to send would be, in the end, an act of self-definition, a people saying to the dark and to itself, "This is who we are, this is what we valued, this is the face we chose to show the universe when we thought no one who could reward or punish us was watching." The deepest truth of a meeting between the stars may be exactly this. It would be less a test of the stranger than a mirror held up to ourselves, and what we saw in it would be, finally, our own answer to the oldest question of all, of what kind of people we had chosen to be. It is worth dwelling a moment on what patience would actually look like across such a meeting, because the slowness that protects also teaches. Over years, intent that cannot be declared can still be read in behavior. A traveler that approached openly, that answered when spoken to, that offered more than it demanded, would slowly build a picture of itself that no single message could forge. And a traveler that hid, that took without giving, that went silent when asked a gentle question, would build a different picture, just as slowly and just as surely. Neither could prove its heart in a sentence. But across the long exchange the dark allows, each would write its true character in its actions, line by patient line, until trust or wariness had earned itself honestly, the only way trust across such a gap ever could. This is why the hopeful view need not be naive, and it is important to be clear about that. To hope is not to fling open every door at once. It is to begin carefully, to reveal a little, and watch how the little is received, to offer a small good faith, and see whether it is met with good faith in return. The deep gives room for exactly this, for a slow ladder of small trusts, each rung tested before the next is climbed. A wise people would neither hide in terror nor rush in blindly. It would reach out by degrees, reading the answers as they came across the years, letting the relationship prove itself gradually, in the one currency that cannot be faked across the dark, which is consistent behavior over a very long time. And perhaps that is the quiet reconciliation of the two views, the fearful and the hopeful, that seemed at first to stand so opposed. The fearful mind is right, that the stakes are total, and the stranger unknown. The hopeful mind is right, that the dark gives time, and that time, used wisely, can turn an unknown stranger into a known one. Caution and hope are not enemies here. They are partners. The caution says go slowly. The hope says go. Together they describe the only sane way to meet another civilization, which is carefully, patiently, and without either the paralysis of terror or the recklessness of blind faith, letting the long, slow light of the deep do what it does best, which is to give two wary peoples all the time in the universe to learn, at last, that they need not have been afraid. When we gather all the walls together, the emptiness and the speed and the time and the language and the body and the deep uncertainty of intent, a meeting between the stars stops being a scene of drama and becomes something stranger and quieter and in its own way more moving. It becomes a small set of constrained possibilities, each shaped by exactly what physics allows, and no more. None of them looks like the meetings imagined in the old stories, with their fleets and their sudden arrivals and their instant understandings. Each is smaller than that, and slower and gentler, and each carries its own particular kind of beauty. There are, perhaps, 4 such possibilities worth sitting with, and it is worth taking them one at a time, unhurried, the way the deep itself would deliver them. The first, and by far the most likely, is the silent pass, in which nothing is exchanged at all. 2 travelers cross the same stretch of emptiness, each perhaps catching sight of the other as a faint warm point far off, a small wrongness in the cold, closing too fast and passing too briefly for anything to be done. There is no time to signal, or the signal would arrive too late to matter. There is no way to slow, or the cost would be more than a journey. And so the two simply pass, each aware for a while of the other's existence, each watching the faint warmth grow and crest and fade, and then the distance opens again and carries them apart forever. Neither ever learns what the other was. The whole meeting is a single shared moment of not being alone, held briefly in the dark, and then the long solitude closes back over both of them, as though it had never opened. And yet even the silent pass would change both travelers, and it is worth resisting the urge to call it a failure. To know, even once, even without a word, that one is not alone in the universe is a fact that would outlast the encounter by ages. A people that had seen another warmth in the dark would carry that knowledge home down all its generations, would look at the sky differently ever after, would hold in its deepest memory the certainty that the deep is not empty of others, only endless enough to keep them apart. The past gives no message and no name, but it gives the single largest fact a civilization could ever learn, that it is one among many, and that fact alone would be enough to reshape how a whole people understood its place in things. The second possibility is a little more fortunate. It is the exchange of records, in which the travelers, unable to stop, fling their stories across the closing gap as light. In the narrow window of nearest approach, each sends toward the other a burst of everything it has chosen to share: who they are, where they came from, what they have seen and learned and loved, knowing there will be no time at all for a reply. Each catches the other's burst already receding into the dark, and then spends the long years afterward slowly decoding a gift from a stranger it will never meet again. The meeting itself is over in minutes. The understanding it leaves behind might take generations to unfold, a whole inheritance of a foreign people, arriving all at once and yielding its meaning only slowly, like a letter so rich it takes a lifetime to finish reading. There is a particular poignancy to this one because it rewards preparation above all else. Only what was made ready in advance can survive the brief window. A traveler who had spent the long, empty years of its journey assembling the message it would send, refining it, distilling its whole civilization into something that could be flung across a closing gap in moments, would give a great gift. A traveler who had not prepared would pass in near silence, with only fragments to offer, forever wishing it had readied more. And so this meeting would belong, in a sense, to the thoughtful, to the peoples who used their solitude to prepare for a chance encounter that might never come, and who, when it came, had something whole and beautiful ready to give in the single instant they were allowed. The third possibility is rarer still, and it is the only one that allows anything like a true conversation. It is the meeting between travelers moving in nearly the same direction, at nearly the same speed, close enough in pace that they stay within reach of one another's signals, not for minutes, but for years. Here, at last, something like a real exchange becomes possible, slow and delayed and stretched across the light lag, but genuine, letter answering letter across the dark. Two civilizations could come to know one another in earnest, trading questions and answers across the years, growing from strangers into something like distant correspondents, even friends, as the slow conversation deepened and the trust was built rung by patient rung. But even this, the richest meeting the universe allows, carries its ending written into its beginning. For no two travelers move at exactly the same speed, and the smallest difference, compounded over years, slowly widens the gap between them. The replies that once took months come to take years, and then longer, as the distance stretches and the light lag grows. The conversation does not end in a quarrel or a parting of ways. It ends in physics, in the gentle, inexorable drift of two paths that were never quite parallel, until at last a message goes out into the dark and no reply ever returns. Not because the friend has stopped answering, but because the friend is now too far for any answer to arrive within the listening of anyone left to hear it. The friendship does not break. It simply, slowly, falls out of reach, and both peoples are left holding the memory of a voice that has drifted, at last, beyond the edge of the possible. The fourth possibility is the strangest and the quietest of all, because in it there is no other mind to meet. It is the encounter with something no longer alive, a derelict, a dark and silent probe, a beacon still faithfully sounding for makers long gone. Here there is no conversation to be had, no intent to weigh, no trust to build, only what the thing left behind. The encountering civilization would find a sealed record of a people it can never answer, their arithmetic perhaps, their images perhaps only the bare and eloquent fact of their having once existed and built this thing and sent it outward with some hope no longer legible. Meeting them would be an act of remembrance far more than of contact, a keeping alive of a stranger's memory a little longer, a carrying onward of a fragment of a vanished people into a dark that had very nearly finished forgetting them. And there is a grace in that fourth meeting that the others do not quite hold. To find the derelict is to become, for a while, the memory of a people who have no one else to remember them. Their world may be gone. Their sun may have changed. Every voice that ever knew their language may have fallen silent ages ago. And yet here, in the finder's hands, is the one thing they made that outlasted them, still holding its course, still carrying whatever they chose to entrust to the dark. To receive it gently, to read what can be read, to carry it a little further, is to give the dead the only gift the living can still give them, which is not to be entirely forgotten. Of all the meetings the deep allows, this one alone can happen even when the other is wholly gone, which makes the vanished, strangely, the most reachable strangers of all. It is worth lingering a little longer inside each of these, because they are not really four cold categories but four different feelings, four ways the deep might let two peoples touch the edge of one another. Picture the silent pass from inside the ship. For years, the warm point grows, studied, wondered over, argued about, a slow suspense with no possible resolution but the passing itself. And then the moment comes, the nearest approach, a single crossing in which the other is as close as it will ever be, close enough perhaps to resolve some hint of shape, and then already it is receding, and the whole thing is memory, and the ship sails on into a dark that feels, somehow, both emptier and less empty than before. Nothing was said. Everything was changed. That is the silent pass, and it may be the commonest song the deep ever sings. Picture too the long conversation, from somewhere in its middle years. By now the strangeness has worn into familiarity. The delay is simply how things are, and a people has learned to live inside it, sending its questions and tending its slow garden of answers, generation handing to generation the growing record of a friendship with a mind not its own. There would be a golden season in such a meeting, a stretch of years when the two travelers were nearest, and the exchange was quickest, and the understanding deepest, when it truly felt as though the gap had been bridged, and two peoples had become, against every odd, companions in the dark. That season would not last. But while it lasted, it would be, for both of them, the warmest thing in all the cold, a proof that the walls, though they could never be torn down, could at least be reached across. And picture the finder of the derelict, alone with a sealed and silent thing that is the last of someone. There would be a hush around such a discovery, the particular hush of standing where something ended. To open what can be opened, gently, to lay out the arithmetic and the images and the fragments, to piece together even a little of who they were, would feel less like exploration than like tending a grave that no one else had visited in a million years. And to carry the record onward, to refuse to let it end here too, would be the quietest heroism the deep allows, the keeping of a promise to strangers who never knew they made it, and never will. What all of these share, beneath their different feelings, is a refusal of the grand and a turning toward the small. The universe does not permit the meetings we dreamed of. It permits these, modest and partial and passing, shaped by hard law, into something humbler than any story. And the strange discovery, sitting with them, is that the humbler thing is also the more beautiful, precisely because it costs so much and gives so little and means so much anyway. A pass. An exchange. A drifting friendship. A tended memory. Against the enormous dark, each of these is almost nothing, and each is very nearly everything. Across all four of these possibilities runs a single thread, and it is worth naming as we close them. In every one, what crosses between the travelers is almost never matter, and almost always light. What passes from one civilization to another is information, a message, a record, a warmth, glimpsed once in the dark, never a cargo, never a touch, never a shared and solid nearness. And in every one, the rarity of any meeting at all means that whichever of these came to pass would very likely be the single most important event in the entire history of the civilization it happened to. A people might wait the whole length of its existence for such a moment and receive, if it received anything, only this: a pass, an exchange, a slow drifting conversation, or the memory of the dead delivered by light across a dark designed to keep all things apart. It is not much measured against the dreams, and measured against the emptiness, it is very nearly a miracle. For all that could be exchanged between two civilizations in the dark, the numbers and the images and the shapes of their science, there is a great deal that could never make the crossing at all, and it is worth naming gently now, at the end, because the parts of a people that matter most to it are so often exactly the parts that do not travel. We have spoken of the walls that make contact hard. There is a last one, softer than the rest, that makes contact incomplete even when it succeeds, and it is worth sitting with quietly before we let the whole matter rest. The feel of a home world would not cross. A civilization could send the plain fact of its origin, a star of such a kind, a world of such a size, a distance measured out in the shared units of light and time. But it could never send what it was like to stand upon that world. The particular color of its sky at the day's end, the exact weight of its air in the lungs, the sound of its weather, the smell of its ground after rain, the thousand small sensations that together made it home, rather than merely a place. These are not facts to be transmitted. They are experiences, bound to particular bodies on a particular world, and they end with the bodies that had them. A stranger could be told everything true about a home and still never feel it, because feeling it was never information in the first place. The meaning of a civilization's own story would not cross intact either. Its history could be described, its long argument with itself about what it wished to be, its triumphs and its griefs, and its slow, hard changes of heart. All of this could be laid out in perfect order and sent whole across the dark. And a stranger would receive it as a list of events without the ache or the pride that made those events matter, a chronicle stripped of exactly the weight that made it worth telling. The data would cross. The meaning would stay behind. For meaning is not in the events themselves, but in what they cost, and what they cost can only be known by the ones who paid, and cannot be handed to anyone else, across the stars or across a room. And the simple, ordinary intimacy of being among one's own would not cross at all. Whatever two civilizations came to understand of one another, however deep their careful bridge of shared arithmetic was built, they would remain strangers in the deepest sense, never able to be wholly at ease together, never sharing the wordless things a people shares only with itself. The gap between the stars, we find at the last, is not only a gap of distance and speed and time and language and body. It is a gap of belonging. Galaxies will continue to drift. The stars overhead may appear eternal, but the great web of galaxies is always in motion. It is the one wall that no bridge reaches over, because it is not made of space or matter, but of the plain fact that a people is at home only among itself. Here we arrive at the quiet paradox that sits at the very center of the whole question, and it is worth holding both halves of it at once. To meet another civilization would be to learn, more surely than ever before, that we are not alone in the universe. And in the very same moment, it would be to feel, more sharply than ever before, that we are alone in the way that matters most. The two truths do not cancel. They deepen each other. The proof that others exist would make the distance to them, the real distance, the distance of belonging, more vivid, not less. We would know at last that the sky is full of others, and know, at last, that not one of them could ever quite be one of us. And yet this is not, in the end, a sorrow to be carried, but something closer to a peace, and it is worth turning it gently toward the light before we close. For the same wall that keeps a stranger out keeps a self intact. The parts of a civilization that cannot cross the gap are precisely the parts that are wholly and only its own, the home that is home to no one else, the story whose meaning belongs to no one else, the belonging that can be shared with no one else. To meet another and find that these cannot be given away is also to discover that they cannot be taken, that a people keeps something entirely its own no matter whom it meets, a self that no crossing, however deep, can reach or diminish. We would not be made smaller by the meeting. We would be shown, precisely, the shape of what is ours. So the answer to the question we began with, what happens when a people meets another civilization between the stars, turns out to be gentler and stranger than the stories promised. There would be no fleets and no conquest, no sudden merging of worlds. There would be a warmth glimpsed once in the dark, or a record flung across a closing gap, or a slow friendship drifting at last out of reach, or the tended memory of someone long gone. There would be a bridge of shared number, reaching partway across a distance that could never fully close. And there would be, on both sides, the same quiet double discovery that the universe is not empty of others, and that home is still and always only where one's own people are. Not alone, and yet not less oneself. Known a little, across a dark that keeps most of the knowing for each to hold alone. It is worth being clear that this last incompleteness is not a failure of any tool, and never could be mended by a better one. No finer transmitter, no cleverer code, no future refinement of the bridge would carry the parts that are made of experience rather than information, because they were never information to begin with. The limit is not in the machinery of sending. It is in the nature of the things one might wish to send. A feeling is not a fact that happens to be hard to transmit. It is a different kind of thing entirely, and the difference is exactly why it stays home. To understand this is to stop mourning the gap as a shortcoming and to begin seeing it as a boundary, the natural edge of what one being can ever hand to another. There is a plainer version of this truth that we already know, close to home, and it is worth remembering because it makes the cosmic version gentler. Even here, among our own kind, in the same room, breathing the same air, sharing the same history and the same words, we cannot fully hand another person the inside of our own life. We can describe a grief and not transmit it. We can tell the story of a joy and watch it land as something smaller in another's hands. The gap between two minds is not created by the distance between the stars. It is only revealed by it, written larger, made impossible to overlook. What we would learn out there, we have always half known in here, that to be a self is to hold something that cannot be given away. And this is why the meeting, for all that it could not complete, would still be worth everything it cost. What can cross the gap is roughly what is universal, the number, the law, the shared bones of how things are. What cannot cross is roughly what is particular, the feeling, the belonging, the home. And a meeting between the stars would trade in the first, while gently teaching both peoples the preciousness of the second. Each would come away knowing more of the universe, and more too of what was irreducibly its own. Each would be enlarged by the knowing and confirmed in the keeping. To meet another and remain oneself is not a small thing. It is, perhaps, the whole of what meeting can ever mean. So we should not imagine the two travelers parting in grief, though the parting is real. We should imagine them parting the way one parts from a good stranger met once on a long road, enriched, quieted, carrying a warmth that does not depend on ever meeting again. Each would sail on into its own dark, toward its own distant star, among its own people, holding the memory of the other as a kind of light. Not a wound. A gift. The gift of having known, for certain and forever, that the great cold is not as empty as it looks, and that somewhere out in it, going the other way, is someone who now knows the same of us. And so we leave the two travelers where the dark keeps them, near enough for one quiet moment to know they were never truly alone, and far enough that the emptiness will carry them apart again without hurry, without malice, and without any need of our watching. Whatever passed between them has been sent and received and folded into the long memory of two peoples who will never meet again. The warmth has faded from the dark. The distance has opened once more, slowly and without sorrow. And each sails on, a little changed, a little less lonely, carrying home the one thing the stars will always allow to cross, which is the simple, steady, unshakable knowledge of the other having been there at all, once, in the long dark, going the other way. Let your breathing slow. Let the distance soften. Let the space behind your eyes grow quiet and wide. Sleep well, and good night.